So our next panelist, let me just spotlight you here, is Deborah Yamane Gaim. Hi, Deborah.
Hi, everybody.
So Deborah, okay. So many questions for you. So Deborah can you introduce yourself quickly? Because I know I kind of butchered that earlier. Sorry about that.
That's okay. My name is Deborah. Yes, I am Habesha, and that is a Habesha name. Deborah Yamana Gaim. I live in Indianapolis last couple of years. We moved here about 2 years ago. But I'm a licensed professional counselor who's currently not practicing. About the last 5 years, I've been a stay-at-home mom, which I don't know, I don't want to say too early, but I think that's changing. Mainly due to social unrest that's happening. Anyway, my professional background is we lived in Nashville for about 10 years, and I worked with the school system. There were 2 agencies that I worked with that had contracts with the school system, the main school system there, to provide counseling for students. So not a school counselor, which they do great jobs, but I don't know if you're aware, school counselors wear multiple hats, and so sitting down and having counseling sessions with kids, is their passion, but that's nearly impossible. And so people like me would come into the schools. We were housed in schools, and and I dealt with only low-income families, and so I served in the communities, dealt with community leaders, dealt with the school and helping support kids that are having basically distractions and mental health issues that are preventing them from being their best at school and getting education so that they can flourish.
Yeah. What an awesome, an amazing role that you have. So in this discussion about racial injustice and this current climate that we're in, a lot of the fears and just uncertainty right now, especially in our Habesha Moms group, has been about how do we talk to our kids about this? At what age is appropriate? My son is 5 years old, and I grapple with that a lot, especially when I have friends who are telling me, oh, he's definitely not too young to go to a protest, or he's not too young to learn about this. And my mama bear mentality wants to shield him from harm or hurt. And from just like a scientific or research basis, like what do professionals say are the best ages to start talking to kids about what's going on?
Yeah, and I'm sure there are a lot of things that are being posted right now. I'm sure some of us have seen maybe a post going around saying at what developmental age kids understand different things about race and racism. And so the research says as early as 6 months, kids are able to differentiate race. And so the question, I want to kind of rephrase it. Should we talk to our kids about race? Absolutely. When do we start? As early as we possibly can. And so then the question becomes, what do we say at what age? And, one thing I want to say, my counseling background, and also my not background, because I'm still a mother, tells me that, there are 2 things to consider. One, the age and developmental age of the child. But another thing that I just really want to stress is you know your child. You know your child. You are the expert on your child. Now, if we wait till we're feeling comfortable and good about it to have that conversation, there are a lot of hard talks we would never have with our children, right? We wouldn't talk to them about drugs and sex and, all these difficult topics, including race. And it does feel like, what you just said, Buddy, that it feels like a betrayal, because our job is to protect the innocence of our children, to protect not only them physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, to guide them and to guard them. And so to be the one to present them with this information that they will be and are judged by the color of their skin feels like a betrayal. At least that's how it feels to me as a mother. However, know that our children are getting messages, whether we know about it or not, whether they're aware of it or not, at all ages. I was talking to a friend of mine who said that when her son was 18 months old in a daycare, someone complained, another mother complained that she didn't want that child in the class or in the daycare same class with her child because her son is Black. Now, obviously at 18 months, that child is not able to process or even understand what's being said. But there are ways that I'm sure that kid is being treated that let him know that he's not being treated the same. So they're getting these messages. And so I challenge us to think of it as we're combating these negative messages that our children are receiving. When they're very young, obviously 6 months is not the time to show them videos of Black men being violently killed. I say you're an expert, but I don't know any moms that would say 6 months is a good time or a year. But rather, what are we telling them? Are we giving them messages? The two things that, according to the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, is we want to make sure that we're not just giving our children information. We're not just telling them what's current event and showing them media clippings, whether it's child appropriate or not. But two things we want to do are we want to provide pride and preparation. Those are two major things. And at the end of the day, you can install pride in your child, at least try to, at any age, right? Tell them how beautiful they are. And specifically say that their brown skin is beautiful. We have this, and it angers me so much when people say things like, we're colorblind. No, it's not an accident that our children are different shades of brown or white or, whatever color. They were created that way. They were made that way, and at the end of the day, we teach our children color when they're in, preschool age. This is red, this is green. So why shouldn't we tell them about their skin color? And so that is instilling pride and telling them how beautiful they are. And anything, one of the things that I struggle with is comments, right? We all do as mothers, comments that people make about the texture of our children's hair. And, I have two sons, 10 and 6. And they're both beautiful, handsome, perfect children. I'm sure none of you feel that way about your children, but there's comparison that happens. This one is lighter skin, this one has this, and that breaks me to pieces. And it's speaking out against those comments, and they're not people that hate them, or they're not people that dislike them. They're people that love them. They're family members. And so for me to be able to stand and say, no, there's nothing wrong with his hair. It's beautiful and curly, and it's beautiful and this. And at the end of the day, I'm trying my best to instill pride, as we all are trying to. So installing pride can start very, very early. Now, the preparation is when you kind of have to decide on, at what age to start that. And, according to research, when kids are in preschool age, right, what is that, 4, 5, and 6, they understand, and they've already noticed skin color, but they understand differences, okay? And so we're not trying to tell them they're better than another skin color. We're trying to tell them they're as good as, right? We're not trying to put other people down. We're trying to let them know, what does your circle look like? What am I showing, not only telling my kids, but what am I showing my kids? So where am I at as a mother? I carry with me my own personal story of things that have been said about my skin color or my hair texture. And so when I'm speaking to my child, am I speaking in a defensive way? Because that comment is going to burn me if I've had a negative experience more than it would another parent, right? And so I'm checking on my experience. And, yeah, and so in terms of when to start that conversation. So sorry, let me look at my notes because I just kind of started preaching. At elementary age, kids understand fairness. So that's how we explain to them when they're in elementary school age. What's fair, what's not fair, using those types of languages. In terms of what specific things you guys want to share about current event, you are the expert on your child. And they kind of lead us sometimes. Like I said, I have a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old. My conversation with my 10-year-old, my conversation with my 6-year-old are not the same. They're not the same. I sat down with my 10-year-old when George Floyd got killed, and I had the intention of having this conversation with him about what happened, but I didn't want to tell him that it ended up with him being dead, because that was me protecting him as a mother. And so I chose my words carefully, and I said, some police are racist, just like how some other people that are not police are racist. And so there was a man that was wrongfully arrested, and the police were too rough with him. And my plan was to just leave it at that. And he said, did they hurt him like in the worst way possible that you can hurt somebody? I'm not going to lie to my child. So I said, yes, he died. That breaks my heart to have that conversation with my child. Somebody else is going to have that conversation with my child. Somebody else is going to share their agenda of what race and racism is. So I'm going to make sure as a mother that I equip him, that I inform him. And we didn't just leave it at that. And that is, this is a very highly emotional, we're talking about our children's safety, for goodness sake. What is more, what else? Like you can pretty much get the best of us with our children, right? And so for me to be the one to share that information with him was not a comfortable place. But, my plan was to be honest with him, to be open with him. Yes, I did withheld exactly how he was killed, because that's what I felt my child could not handle. And am I going to have this conversation again? Yes, I am going to have this conversation. When Ahmaud Arbery died, my son runs track. And it felt like most of us, it felt very much like someone in my community, because it is someone in my community, got hurt. And I made the connection because my son is a runner. And so I felt like I had to share that information with him because he's a runner, specifically that information. Now, mind you, like I said, 6 months is where we start having these conversations, is where we start introducing pride in in their own culture. So it was not the first time that we're having this conversation. It wasn't just during Black History Month. It is not just in the month of February. It isn't just when something racist happened, but it needs to be ongoing. At different stages, we kind of give them bite-sized information, right? It's kind of like having the birds and the bees talk with our children. It's never a good idea to sit down your child at 14 years old and say, here it is from the beginning to the end. Here are the birds and the bee talk. Because first of all, they already know stuff. These children are smart. They already know things, okay? Like most of us, my parents didn't have that talk. I found out through a neighbor kid, and I wanted to make sure my child was not having that experience. So you give them those bite-sized information. Somebody who has a 10-year-old might tell them the whole thing, and sometimes we're in a situation where maybe you have another child and, your other older child is curious, so then that brings up a conversation. So there is not like a clear-cut answer, but the option of not talking to our children is absolutely failing them. It's absolutely failing them. So getting back to my notes, in fact, there are actually benefits to other things besides just knowledge. According to the APA again, here's a quote from them. It says, we know that when caregivers engage in racial talk or race or racism, it has positive effect on children's academics, behavior, and language skills. That's amazing to me. So there are benefits besides just you are aware of what's happening in the country. And we're also preparing them. The last thing we want to do is send our children to school and they're shocked when something happens to them personally. They're shocked when they hear stories that we have not shared with them. So we got to be able to equip them so that they're able to be advocates for one another, advocates for themselves, and to recognize when somebody's being unfair, whether it's because of their race or any reason, right? Let's see. And, I just want to add this too. One of the things that I was reading is the importance of, if you and your spouse or your children's parent are in the same household or co-parenting, you don't even have to be in the same household, having these conversations before you have this conversation with your child. Because sometimes, I know my approach and my husband's approach are not the same. I'm a therapist, so I think like a therapist. But also there are things that he can bring into the conversation as a Black male talking to my sons that I can't. He can share information and experience that I can't. And so, for me to sit down with my husband and have, how are we going to talk to our kids? How much is good? That is the definition of co-parenting, right? Is definitely beneficial. Now, I talked a little bit about elementary school age, middle school age. What do we do with middle school age? With middle school age, there's a lot of emotional management and anger management that needs to take place. Because these are things that make us angry. These are things that frustrate us. Another human being being treated unfairly because of their skin color should enrage any human being that has any empathy, like our sister said earlier. So in middle school, you're also teaching them how to be an activist, whether that would be, and I think what that does by teaching them they're activists, it gives them whatever control they do have. And I know I'm not naive enough to say they have control and they can fix everything, because I can't as their mother, so they can't. But it gives them control over what they have control over. When you see something, say something. Go tell a teacher. Come tell me. You can always come and speak to me about this, or to your father. You stand up for your friend. I tell my kids all the time, and we also live in a predominantly white neighborhood with a large Indian population. But what we see, and the leaders in our community are Caucasian. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, I need to make sure that my children are standing up and making sure they're being fair for everybody. But they have to know what unfair is in order to stand up for what is unfair. They have to know what just looks like to understand what unjust looks like. So at middle school and high school, that's pretty much what we focus on. At middle school and high school age, I don't know this from a parent perspective, but just from the clients that I've worked with, they have their story, they have their perspective, they have their experience. So it becomes less about us sharing and us telling and us informing, but more about an equal dialogue and having that conversation. And these conversations of race, and I say these because this is not an algebra problem where you just sit down, solve it one time, and you're done. These are ongoing conversations. These are conversations that start as soon as the child understands at 6 months that they're brown, they're Black, they're white, till really always. We continue to talk about, we continue to talk to them until there's a solution and racism is gone, which I don't know when that is, but we continue to have these conversations. And we also make ourselves open, because a lot of times, I don't know about how you grew up, but our parents are very good about giving us advice, telling us what to do, right? But there's very little in our culture. It's considered, an Eritrean culture, it's considered almost disrespectful when somebody has an opinion, a child has an opinion, and they want to come back. But at the end of the day, we want to make that an open and safe place for them to be able to come and talk to us and not feel ashamed. And even if they are part of it being biased or racist, for them to be able to come and say, one time I said this, one time I did this. And it's interesting. I think both Almaz and Ababa mentioned this earlier, and I just wanted to touch on it really quick about, as Habesha's saying, like, oh, that's something that affects other people or Black people. And, they talked about how dangerous that mindset is. But here's what I want to say to you, okay? I'm sure I'm not the only one that's had racial experiences. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have had it. We came to this country when I was in 6th grade, and there was a teacher that I loved so much that really just took on our family, really, and really helped us. We didn't have that much of a resource, and this was my teacher. And one day I went home and I said, teachers call you by, they can come up with pet names or whatever, honey, sweetheart, or whatever. And so I said, Mom, what does the N-word mean? And my mom was shocked. She said, who did you hear this from? And I told her my teacher. And I could tell that was not a nice thing that my teacher just called me. Here's the thing. Nobody asks for passport, or nobody asks for birth certificate to see where you're born before they judge you by the color of your skin. So if we think our children will not experience, what we're doing is we're actually shutting down being an advocate for our child. We're telling our child, this does not happen. Your experience is not valid. And we're giving them a false sense of safe, which is not safe. And at any age, especially at young elementary school age, when kids are not being told what a problem and what a crisis is going on, they create their own dialogue in their mind. They create their own narrative, and that narrative is almost always blaming themselves. That narrative is almost always worse than reality. So if I don't talk to my kids, I even tell my kids I'm very stressed because of the current events that are happening. And that's why I'm yelling at you about making your bed. It really has nothing to do with that. And if I don't explain that, then my child is going to walk around thinking that he's a bad kid because he didn't make his bed. So being vulnerable to our children and saying, hey, I'm struggling today because of this. But of course, knowing your child can handle, because your child is also not your therapist. And just being honest. And one of the questions that was asked is, how do we talk to our children about race and racism without making them feel inferior or fearful? Again, going back to teaching them pride, teaching them what they can and cannot do, and not giving them a false sense of safety, because at the end of the day, that's lying to our children, right? Commending them when they're doing good, commending them when they're recognizing the differences, even in skin color. When my oldest son was 7 years old, he had a birthday party, and his best friend at the time, only because we moved cities, nothing happened, at a time came over for the birthday party. So as he was leaving, I can't remember which one of them said, even though we're different skin color, his best friend is white, we're still best friends. And I remember family were like, oh, I can't believe he said that. Oh, and I was actually beaming with pride that my child felt so comfortable, and his friend felt so comfortable to recognize the beauty in their friendship, to recognize their skin color. Because let's face it, there are a lot of negative ways that could have gone, right? And so commending our children when they stand up for something, when they recognize, rather than saying, no, don't call that lady white. When they ask, another example might, I was with my child, I believe he was 3 at the time, my oldest, and a very dark young man walked right by us. And of course, children have no filter, and he said out loud, Mom, how come some people are really, really dark? For a moment, I'm ashamed to say, I just went, I wish you wouldn't have said that so loud. But listen, this man knows he's chocolate skinned. This wasn't anything new that my child just pointed out. So saying, yes, some people God created us all in different shade, and taking that and making that, and instead of shaming them, and sometimes we do that because we don't want them to embarrass, right? We don't want them to call out anybody, but congratulating, like, oh, good job, you noticed that. Good job. Yes, that's actually correct. That is what, that man is dark skinned. And then the other question, let's see. I think somebody asked about, are there studies that prove whether or not that prove that it's helpful to or beneficial not to talk to children about race? And, as I stated earlier, there are different benefits to talking to children about race. But one thing that I did read, which surprised me, was according to, I believe this was Psychology Today, they found that this was a study done around high school age kids, that without that pride piece, when all we're doing is just sharing information of what's going on, sharing our rage, rightfully so, and not equipping them with the pride and what they can do, that a lot of boys feel very angry. And I don't mean to stereotype teenagers, but I don't know if you guys remember, being teenagers, it's kind of hard to control your emotions. And the last thing that we want to do is put our children in danger by not giving them the tools to be able to manage their anger, to be able to manage their frustration. So giving them that space to talk about it, giving them that pride to know, listen, somebody thinking that something is wrong with you because of your skin color is their issue. It's not your issue. That's not how you were created. That's not how you were born. You were born out of love. You were born out of, out of love. You were no accident. You were no, just kind of really installing them. And I think if we're empowering them as much as we are preparing them, because that is part of the preparation. And I know somebody's going to talk about legal, knowing their legal rights and knowing how to, and I hate that this is even an avenue we have to go to, but, even telling them and how they should better conduct themselves to stay safe, right? They shouldn't have to act a certain way. If they get pulled over by police officers simply because they're Black, they should be able to be outraged and angry and express that. But knowing that, at the end of the day, I want my child to come home safe. And we can then later fight the injustice. And so knowing what their rights are, knowing what they're worth is, I think, what's going to make them feel empowered. And also surrounding them with great role models. I cannot say that enough. Talking about race and racism is not one of those things that you can just talk about and leave it at that. We have to back it up with our actions. What does my circle look like? I mentioned earlier, we live in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood. That means me leaving my community and making sure that my children are around other brown children so that they know and they see greatness in other children. That means making sure that I'm supporting other communities, make sure that I'm lifting up other brothers and sisters that need my help as well, and for them to see that, and for them to, making sure that when I have people over, when COVID is over, that my table is not just all Habesha, my table is not just all Black, is not all white, that the people that I break bread with, the people that I associate with, the people that I'm vulnerable with, are people that come from different backgrounds. We live in America, for goodness sake. And I just want to urge, I know we're all very proud of our Eritrean and Ethiopian heritage, as we should be. And that's also another thing that we definitely need to install in the next generation, especially those that are born here, the new generation. But making sure that our kids even know, we don't want our children to be shocked when they go out into, whatever corporate job they get or whatever field they go into later, and all their coworkers are white and they don't really know how to interact, or they feel a sense of inferiority. And so making sure that we are showing them by example who we are associating with, who our social circle is. Let's see. Somebody asked about, when the question was, should we be taking our children to protest? I believe that's an individual decision. One thing to keep in mind is not just should we be empowering our kids to speak up? Yes, of course. But also, number one, we're in the middle of a pandemic, making sure we're taking measures if we decide that that's the kind of way, that's how we want to show our kids to stand up for their right. Number two, making sure that it's an environment that aligns with our belief and how we're raising our kids, making sure that we are, that they're going to be safe, making sure that we have a plan that, a lot of protests are starting peaceful, and a lot of children are there, and the last thing we want to do is traumatize them. I saw an article recently about a 4-year-old, the title said a 4-year-old gets comforted by a police officer. And I read the story, and it went on to say that a police officer was coming near this little 4-year-old Black child, little girl, and her father was the one that recorded this and that was being interviewed, but she was with family, and she started crying out of fear. She started crying out of fear. And so the police officer came and said, gave her a hug and said, and what she said to the police officer was, "Are you going to kill us? Are you going to kill our family?" So we have to make sure that we're equipping our children. I'm not judging what the parents did or did not do, or should they have taken her to the protest or anything like that. That is absolutely their decision. However, we don't want to expose our children to things that automatically bring them fear. We want to be able to control whatever we can to make sure that they feel comforted, even in these very, very difficult times. So I say it is your decision as a parent. You know your child. It might be better to take one child and not another, or maybe it may be better for a male child and not a female child, or whatever your decision is. You know your child. And at the end of the day, that is, I feel like, personally, whether you're a person of faith, that is your ministry as a mother. That is your calling as a mother. That is our responsibility. Yes, it is a huge responsibility. Each and every one of us know that. We feel that. We've cried over our children. We've cried over other people's children, I'm sure many times, as I have this week. But know that we're not powerless. Know that there are things that we can do. And, I believe it was Almaz that said earlier that she was very apprehensive about, talking today. And to be honest with you, I was in a point where I was saying, I don't want to talk about race with anybody, but I don't want to have to explain anything to anybody. So knowing where you're at mentally makes a difference too, making sure that you're taking care of yourself mentally as a parent and emotionally and physically as well. And, for me, where I feel power is I feel powerful in being able to have that conversation with my sons. I feel powerful in being able to have this conversation with my husband. I feel powerful in being able to have this conversation with you, moms. I feel power in being able to pour into you and you into me, and for us to empower each other. So yes, I have no control over racism. I have no control over the negative things my sons will likely experience because of their skin color. But there are a lot of ways that I can fight. There are a lot of ways that I am powered, and there are a lot of ways that you have a power. And so I really urge you guys, to take a proactive approach. This is trauma, and trauma leaves you broken. Trauma leaves you feeling powerless over things even that you have power over. But I just really want to encourage you guys to know that you, as cheesy as it sounds, you have the power by being a mother. You have a power by being an advocate for your child. And don't let that, don't, even when that thought in the back of your mind comes up and says, is this racism? Is that why they're treating my child differently? Is that why they're not letting my child into this program or into this place? You speak up. You speak up. Because at the end of the day, guess what you're showing your children? That they're worth it, that they should have pride in themselves, that they should stand up, and that you feel like they should stand up, and that you feel like they're worth it. And at the end of the day, if we don't pump our children with power and with prayer and with love and with support and with affirmation, we can't wait on anybody else to do it. One of the questions is, are white parents talking to their children about race? I sure hope so. And, from here on, the parents that I'm close with that are white, I'm going to make sure that they're having that conversation, because your white child is hanging around with my brown child. So I need to make sure that he's safe with you. I need to make sure that if you're out somewhere and something happens with my child, that you're going to stand up for him, that you're going to have his back. And so in order for that to happen, you have to have similar conversations. It's not the same, but similar conversations with your children as a white parent. And I want to say, this is not choosing sides. This is not choosing the black side or the white side. We're affirming our children who they are. They're black, they're Eritrean, they're Ethiopian, they're biracial. We can absolutely affirm each and every one of those identities of our children, and we're not having to choose one over the other. My children are, of course, all our children are way more than their heritage and their skin color. And it's about affirming, you're good at this child, and you're good at this, and, I really like how you do this. But strengthening them is where our power comes. And at the end of the day, that's what I have control over with my children, and that's what I choose to focus on. And yes, I'm absolutely burdened by somebody looking at my child and not seeing their worth. I'm absolutely heartbroken by that. But I can only focus on what I can focus on.
So good, Deborah. Seriously, thank you. So good. Yeah, like I said, I've been very apprehensive about what to share, when, and how. Just not feeling comfortable myself. But I think even the minute you shared that quote about, the studies showing that children who were told about, talked about race, showed positive effects on their academics and social lives. And I think that even is a testament to, I think, how a lot of us grew up as Eritreans and Ethiopians, and how much pride and, was pumped into us about our identity and who we were. I think that does attribute to, I guess, how we maybe showed up in life, or how far we were able to go, or how resilient or persistent we were in this world, in this country. So it definitely does give me a lot of, it makes me feel better about the positivity of sharing this with him. And even to your quote about when we don't tell our kids what's going on, they make up their own narratives in their minds. And that hit me because with COVID, I took a while to explain that to my son, because I didn't think it would make a big difference as to why we were staying at home, but realized, oh, maybe we should talk about why we're staying at home. It would make a difference. And it did. And he was able to even start policing other people, when we would have, I don't know, somebody come over to drop off a package, or a contractor in our backyard, and my, son will literally be like, wait, give them 6 feet. You got to make sure, and it was just like, okay, he gets it. He knows what's going on. So it is important that we're sharing our circumstances and what's going on in the world with them. And yeah, that was so good. Thank you so much. So you shared elementary to middle school and how we can talk to our kids at that age. And did you have anything else that you wanted to add before I wanted to jump over to Elsa? But before I do that, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I just wanted to also talk about, I know there's been a lot of frustration from people saying that, our organizations of faith or communities that we belong to are not being very vocal about a lot of the issues of race going on. And, I just want to encourage, if you belong to a church, you can be part of that solution too. You can be part of that conversation. Reach out to your clergy, reach out to, whatever person, to your community, and say, how can I assist in this conversation? How can I, help? And I think that's definitely more proactive. And if you're in an environment where someone refuses the validity of that conversation, then maybe that's not the community that we need to belong to. But I think rather than, we're in an age of social media where we're unfriending and, real quick because of people's opinion, which I totally am behind. But the organizations and the schools that we belong to, we have a voice. We have a voice, and we need to make sure that we are heard. We need to make sure that we go and say, hey, my children's school was very, very vocal about, all these counseling opportunities and mental health resources when it came to COVID-19. And I'm ashamed to say, with race issues, I haven't heard anything. And I'm going to reach out to the guidance counselor and say, what are we doing about this? Because it's not a Black kid issue. It's not a Black neighborhood issue. So I just want to say, be part of that solution as well in your community, in your church, in your, place of work, really anywhere. I think, I hope I answered every question.
Yes.
I just kind of
Yeah.
rolled with it.
So good. No, you absolutely
If
did.
there are any questions that I haven't.
No, you absolutely did. And I think one of the questions on there, which was a part of another question that you answered, was about how do we ensure that sharing this with our kids isn't going to result in our kids moving in the world with like a victim mindset. And I think you answered that perfectly now by saying we need to share our voices. We need to be the solution in these areas where we're not seeing any action being taken. And that's true because our kids are looking to us and how we move, how we show up. And so if we are taking action and we are not showing up with a victim mindset, then I don't necessarily think that they would either. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you so much, Deborah. I appreciate you. I really do.
And thank you for starting this conversation. And you know, you're absolutely right. This is an ongoing thing. It's not a one-day thing. And I'm thankful for this community. I really am.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.